I'd gladly trade my husband for the real father of my two boys. I joked playfully about my husband in front of our friends. But we all went silent when he replied with this. It was 2 in the morning, and the cold seeped through the floorboards of my beat-up work truck. I am 41 years old. I own a small heating and air conditioning repair business, a company I built from absolutely nothing. My hands are rough, permanently stained with grease and oil, calloused from years of gripping wrenches and wrestling with rusted pipes in freezing basements. I always wore those calluses like a badge of honor. I thought they were the foundation of a good, honest life. I thought they were the reason my wife, Clara, could wear expensive clothes and sell high-end real estate to people who never had to get their hands dirty. But sitting there in the dark, under the flickering street lamp outside my own home, none of that mattered. In my shaking hands, I held a piece of heavy, watermarked paper. A medical document. The clinical language printed on it felt like a knife dragging slowly across my chest. Let me tell you how this started. Just a month ago, my youngest boy, Miles, who is 8 years old, took a nasty spill at his baseball game. He cut his leg pretty bad on a piece of metal fencing. We rushed him to the emergency room. He needed a few stitches and, because he lost a bit of blood and was a little pale, they ran a routine blood panel just to be safe. I was sitting in the plastic chair in the hospital room when the doctor walked in, checking his clipboard. He casually mentioned Miles's blood type. It was a type that is biologically impossible for Clara and me to produce together. I remember the doctor looking at me with a strange, fleeting expression before quickly changing the subject. That single passing comment planted a dark, rotting seed in my brain. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a lab error. I told myself Clara, my wife of 15 years, the woman who kissed me every morning, would never do something like that. But the seed grew. It choked me at night. So, 2 weeks later, I bought a private DNA testing kit. I swabbed my own cheek. Then, under the guise of playing a funny science game, I swabbed Miles and my older son, Nolan, who is 11. I mailed the package and waited. Now, the results were here. I read the numbers again, praying my tired eyes were playing tricks on me in the dim light of the dashboard. But the ink was permanent. Subject A, Nolan. 0% probability of paternity. Subject B, Miles. 0% probability of paternity. 0. Neither of them. All those years. All those sleepless nights walking the floor with a crying infant. The first steps. The proud father moments at school plays. The thousands of hours I worked overtime, freezing my fingers off in winter, burning my skin in summer attics, just to make sure those two boys had a college fund. It was all built on a lie thick enough to choke on. My entire adult life, my identity as a father, was a carefully constructed illusion. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, trying to hold back the scream that was tearing up my throat. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, the sudden noise making me jump. I wiped my face with the back of my gritty hand and looked at the screen. It was a text message from Tristan. Tristan was my best friend. We had known each other since our 20s. He was also a sort of silent business partner, a wealthy wholesale distributor who sold me parts at a discount when I first started my company. Tristan lived a very different life than I did. He drove a pristine German sports car. He wore suits tailored in Italy. He was the fun, wealthy uncle to my boys. He was the guy who bought them massive, expensive gifts every Christmas, while I spent my weekends building them a treehouse with scrap wood. I always appreciated him. I thought he was family. The text message read, "Hey buddy, that massive wine fridge in my basement stopped cooling completely. I've got thousands of dollars of vintage stuff in there. Mind swinging by tonight? Clara mentioned you were working late anyway." I stared at the glowing screen. Clara had told him my schedule. Of course she had. I took a deep breath, shoving the devastating lab report into the bottom of my heavy metal toolbox. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life. The drive to Tristan's massive estate took exactly 15 minutes. I drove through suburban streets lined with perfect manicured lawns and perfect, quiet lies. I pulled into his circular brick driveway. My rusted, dented truck looked like an absolute eyesore parked next to his shiny black luxury sedan. Tristan opened the door before I even knocked. He was wearing a silk bathrobe, holding a glass of expensive scotch, smelling of high-end cologne. He smiled broadly, patting my shoulder with a hand so soft it felt like it had never lifted anything heavier than a golf club. He thanked me for coming out so late, leading me through marble hallways decorated with modern art that cost more than I made in an entire year. We went down to his finished basement, which looked like a private gentleman's club. Leather couches, custom pool table, and the massive, silent wine fridge sitting in the corner. I did not say much. I just nodded, set my toolbox down, and went to work. Muscle memory took over. My hands knew exactly how to test the compressor, check the coils, and find the loose relay switch. It was a simple fix. But the whole time I was kneeling there, fixing his machine, Tristan stood behind me, casually asking how Clara was doing, saying she seemed a little stressed lately. Every word out of his mouth felt like a physical blow. I tightened a bolt with my wrench, holding back the urge to swing it backward. After I snapped the back panel of the fridge into place, the hum of the compressor filled the room. The cold air started flowing immediately. Tristan cheered, offering me a drink, asking what he owed me. I told him it was nothing, just friends helping friends. I kept my voice steady, my face completely blank. I asked him if I could use the bathroom to wash the grease off my hands before driving home. He told me to use the master bathroom upstairs, saying it had the best hot water. I walked up his sweeping staircase. My work boots felt heavy on the plush carpet. I stepped into the master bathroom. It was larger than my living room, covered in floor-to-ceiling white marble, with a massive soaking tub and a vanity lined with dozens of expensive bath products. I turned on the hot water, watching the dark grease swirl down the gold-plated drain. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. I reached for a thick, soft towel resting on a shelf next to the mirror. As I pulled the towel away, my hand knocked over a tall glass jar of bath salts. It tipped over, revealing something tucked securely behind it. My heart stopped completely. It was a small, square piece of glossy paper. A Polaroid photograph. I picked it up with a trembling hand. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It was Clara, my wife. She was completely naked except for a piece of black lace lingerie I had never seen in our entire marriage. She was posed right here, on this exact marble vanity where I was currently standing. Her wedding ring was clearly visible on her finger. She was looking directly into the camera with an expression of pure, unadulterated lust. An expression she had not given me in over a decade. At the bottom of the white border, written in her familiar handwriting, were 5 words, "For my real man." The pieces snapped together so violently it made me dizzy. The 0% paternity. The late nights she claimed to be showing houses. The expensive new clothes she said she bought on sale. Tristan's constant presence. His soft hands. The boys. Oh God, the boys. Nolan had Tristan's jawline. Miles had his eyes. How had I been so blind? A lesser man would have walked downstairs and broken Tristan's jaw. A lesser man would have grabbed the wrench from the basement and destroyed everything in sight. But looking at that photo, the grief and the shock burned away, leaving behind something entirely new. My blood ran cold. My mind became completely clear and calculating. If I hit him, I go to jail and they win. I carefully slid the Polaroid into my front chest pocket, right over my heart. I wiped my face, made sure the jar of bath salts was exactly where it had been, and walked slowly downstairs. Tristan was waiting by the front door, swirling his scotch. I smiled at him. I actually smiled. I told him to have a good night, shook his soft hand, and walked out into the cold air. The war had just begun. The drive home felt like floating through a nightmare. Everything looked the same, but the world had fundamentally shifted underneath me. I parked the truck and sat in the driveway for a long time. Clara's car was not there. She was still out. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet house. I walked straight upstairs, bypassing our bedroom, and stopped at the door of the boys' room. I pushed it open gently. The nightlight cast a warm, yellow glow over the 2 twin beds. Nolan was sprawled out on his back, his arm dangling off the edge. Miles was curled into a tight ball, holding his worn-out stuffed bear. I stood there for 20 minutes, just watching them breathe. I traced the lines of their faces in the dim light. Now that I knew the truth, the resemblance was undeniable. They were not mine. They were the biological product of the man who had been laughing in my face for over a decade. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the doorframe to stay standing. But then, Nolan muttered something in his sleep and shifted. He looked exactly like the little boy who had cried in my arms when his pet fish died. He looked like the boy I had spent 3 weeks teaching to ride a bicycle without training wheels. I thought about the thousands of school lunches I packed, the monsters I chased out from under the beds, the feverish foreheads I had kissed in the middle of the night. Biology is just a mechanical accident. DNA is just a recipe. Fatherhood is a choice. Fatherhood is showing up every single day when it is hard, when you are exhausted, when you have nothing left to give. I was their father. That love was real, even if the foundation was a lie. I would not let Clara or Tristan take that away from me. I quietly closed their door and walked downstairs to my garage workshop. I pulled the DNA test results from my toolbox. I fed the heavy papers into my industrial shredder, watching the laboratory proof of my humiliation get chewed into tiny, unreadable strips. But I kept the Polaroid. I placed it inside a plastic sleeve and hid it behind a false panel behind my workbench. Evidence. Clara came home at 3 in the morning. She slipped into bed like a ghost. I laid there with my eyes closed, controlling my breathing. She smelled like expensive soap and Tristan's signature cologne. I did not move a single muscle until the sun came up. Morning came with the usual chaotic rush. Breakfast, packing backpacks, the boys arguing over the television. Clara rushed around the kitchen in her sharp real estate blazer, looking perfectly put together. She poured coffee, handed me a mug, and kissed my cheek. "Have a great day, honey," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "I love you." I looked her right in the eyes. "I love you too," I replied automatically. It was terrifying how easy it was to lie once you realized the other person had been doing it for years. After they all left for work and school, I did not go to my repair jobs. I canceled my appointments for the day. I needed to build a surveillance network. Clara thought I was just a dumb blue-collar worker who fixed air conditioners. She forgot that modern heating and cooling systems are highly complex networks of sensors, mainframes, and programmed logic. I knew my way around technology better than she ever would. I knew Clara's routine perfectly. Every Thursday night, she took a long, hot bath with a glass of wine, claiming it was her spa time to decompress from selling houses. She always left her phone charging on the kitchen counter for exactly 45 minutes. That Thursday evening, as soon as I heard the bathroom door lock and the water running, I grabbed her phone. I had purchased a cheap, prepaid burner phone with cash 2 days prior, along with specialized cloning software I bought off the internet. I plugged her phone into my laptop, then connected the burner phone. My hands were sweating. If she walked out, it was over. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. 10%. 30%. I could hear the faint sound of her music playing in the bathroom. 50%. The minutes felt like hours. Finally, the transfer was complete. I unplugged her device, wiped my fingerprints off the screen, and set it down exactly as she had left it. But I wasn't done. I took a tiny, physical hardware keystroke logger and plugged it deep into the back port of her home office laptop, hiding it behind the desk frame. I also installed a hidden microphone software program that would activate whenever the laptop was open. I was turning our home into an intelligence-gathering facility. Over the next 2 months, I played the role of the tired, oblivious husband to absolute perfection. I ate dinner with my family. I asked Clara about her day. I went to the boys' soccer games. And every night, after everyone was asleep, I locked myself in my garage workshop, opened my laptop, and descended into hell. The cloned phone updated automatically. I sat at my workbench, surrounded by wrenches and copper tubing, scrolling through thousands of text messages. The casual cruelty of their words was breathtaking. Clara would text Tristan while sitting on the couch next to me. She called me a pathetic loser. She complained about the smell of oil on my clothes. Tristan would reply with laughing emojis, telling her not to worry, that her blue-collar ATM machine would keep paying the bills until they were ready. I listened to hours of audio recordings from her laptop. I heard her having intimate phone calls with Tristan while I was outside mowing the lawn. I heard them laughing about the times I had thanked Tristan for being such a good friend to my boys. But the absolute worst discovery came on a rainy Tuesday night. I was digging through a hidden cloud drive I found via the keystroke logger. There was a folder titled simply Exit Strategy. I opened the documents one by one. My chest tightened so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. It was not just an affair. It was a hostile takeover of my life. There were offshore bank statements. Clara and Tristan had set up a dummy LLC company. For the last 4 years, Clara had been slowly, methodically transferring thousands of dollars from our joint savings and my business accounts into that offshore entity, claiming they were bad real estate investments. Then, I found the legal drafts. They had a lawyer on retainer. The plan was laid out clearly in an email. Clara was going to file for divorce right after the new year. She was going to claim I was emotionally unstable and verbally aggressive. She had drafted a custody agreement that would give her full, sole custody of Nolan and Miles. And the final, most sickening detail, she was going to demand maximum child support and alimony. I stared at the glowing screen, my vision blurring with quiet rage. They were going to leave me completely bankrupt, living in a miserable apartment, paying thousands of dollars a month to support Tristan's biological children while they lived happily in his mansion. They thought I was a stupid, uneducated mechanic. They thought they could steal my money, steal my dignity, and steal the 2 boys I had raised from birth. I slowly closed the laptop. The sadness was entirely gone now. There was nothing left inside me but a cold, mechanical precision. It was time to stop gathering information. It was time to build a machine that would grind their perfect, arrogant lives into dust. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. It was 2 in the morning, and the bitter cold of late autumn was slowly seeping through the rusted floorboards of my old work truck. I am 41 years old. I own a small heating, ventilation, and air conditioning repair business, a modest company that I built from absolutely nothing but sweat, debt, and a second-hand toolbox. My hands are rough, permanently stained with the dark grease of $1,000 machines, heavily calloused from years of gripping heavy wrenches and wrestling with rusted pipes in the freezing, damp basements of strangers. For over a decade, I wore those calluses like a badge of absolute honor. I genuinely believed they were the solid foundation of a good, honest life. I believed they were the sole reason my wife, Clara, could afford to wear expensive designer clothes, drive a leased luxury sport utility vehicle, and sell high-end real estate to wealthy people who never had to get their fingernails dirty for a single day in their lives. But sitting there in the suffocating darkness, parked under the flickering, dying amber street lamp just half a block away from my own home, none of that hard work mattered anymore. In my shaking, grease-stained hands, I held a piece of heavy, expensive watermarked laboratory paper. A medical document. The clinical, emotionless language printed on that page felt like a jagged knife being dragged very slowly across the center of my chest. Let me explain exactly how this nightmare started. Just 1 month ago, my youngest boy, Miles, who is 8 years old, took a terrible spill at his weekend baseball game. He was running for third base and slid hard, cutting his leg deeply on a jagged piece of exposed metal fencing. There was a lot of blood, and we had to rush him straight to the emergency room. He needed quite a few stitches, and because he had lost a decent amount of blood and was looking dangerously pale, the attending physician decided to run a routine blood panel just to be entirely safe. I was sitting there in that uncomfortable plastic hospital chair, holding my brave little boy's hand, when the doctor walked back in, checking his clipboard. In a completely casual, passing tone, he mentioned the boy's blood type. It was a specific type that is biologically, scientifically impossible for Clara and me to produce together. I remember the doctor looking up at me, his eyes widening for just a fraction of a second in realization, before he quickly cleared his throat and abruptly changed the subject back to the bandages. That single, passing comment planted a dark, rotting, poisonous seed deep inside my brain. At first, I desperately tried to ignore it. I told myself it had to be a careless lab error. Hospitals make mistakes all the time, right? I told myself that Clara, my beautiful wife of 15 long years, the woman who kissed my cheek every single morning before I left for work, would never, ever do something so incredibly evil. But the seed grew. It choked me during the day, and it kept me staring at the ceiling all night. So, 2 agonizing weeks later, I secretly purchased a private, highly accurate medical-grade paternity testing kit online. I swabbed the inside of my own cheek in the bathroom at work. Then, under the innocent guise of playing a funny science experiment game about genetics before bedtime, I carefully swabbed Miles, and then I swabbed my older son, Nolan, who is 11. I mailed the discreet package the very next morning and spent the next 2 weeks living in a state of constant, nauseating anxiety. Now, the results were finally here, delivered to my private post office box so Clara would not see them. I read the bold black numbers again, desperately praying my tired, strained eyes were playing cruel tricks on me in the dim, yellow light of the dashboard. But the ink was permanent, and the truth was absolute. Subject A. Nolan. 0% probability of paternity. Subject B. Miles. 0% probability of paternity. 0. Neither of them. Not a single drop of my blood ran in their veins. All of those years. All of those exhausting, sleepless nights walking the hardwood floor with a crying, colicky infant resting on my shoulder. The wobbly first steps in the living room. The incredibly proud father moments at the elementary school holiday plays. The thousands of brutal hours I worked overtime, freezing my fingers to the bone in the dead of winter, burning the skin off my neck in suffocating summer attics, just to make absolutely sure those 2 beautiful boys had a fully funded college account waiting for them. It was all a complete fabrication. It was all built on a sickening lie thick enough to choke on. My entire adult life, my very identity as a provider and a father, was nothing but a carefully constructed, monstrous illusion. My broad chest heaved heavily as I gasped for the cold air, desperately trying to bite down on my own fist to hold back the agonizing scream that was violently tearing its way up my throat. My mobile phone suddenly buzzed violently in the plastic cup holder, the harsh, unexpected noise making my entire body jump. I wiped my face fiercely with the rough back of my jacket sleeve, taking a deep, shuddering breath before I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Tristan. Tristan was supposedly my absolute best friend in the entire world. We had known each other since our reckless 20s, long before either of us had any real money or responsibilities. He was also a sort of silent business partner to me, a highly successful, incredibly wealthy wholesale distributor for heating and cooling components who sold me essential parts at a deep discount when I first started my struggling company. Tristan lived a vastly different, almost alien life compared to mine. He drove a pristine, roaring German sports car that cost more than my entire house. He wore custom suits meticulously tailored in Italy. Most importantly, he was the fun, wealthy, charismatic uncle to my 2 boys. He was the guy who casually bought them massive, ridiculously expensive video game consoles every Christmas, while I spent my precious weekends carefully building them a wooden treehouse in the backyard with salvaged scrap lumber. I had always appreciated him deeply. I genuinely thought of the man as my own brother. The text message on the screen read, "Hey buddy, that massive custom wine fridge down in my basement just stopped cooling completely. I've got thousands of dollars of rare vintage stuff in there getting warm. Mind swinging by tonight to take a look? Clara mentioned you were working late anyway." I sat there frozen, just staring at the bright text. Clara had told him my schedule. Of course she had. They were coordinating. They were always communicating. I took a deep, ragged breath, carefully folding the devastating, life-destroying laboratory report and shoving it deep into the bottom compartment of my heavy metal toolbox, right beneath the heavy pipe wrenches. I turned the key in the ignition. The old engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. The drive to Tristan's massive, sprawling estate took exactly 15 minutes. I drove slowly through the winding suburban streets, an area lined with perfectly manicured lawns, towering oak trees, and perfect, quiet, incredibly expensive lies. I finally pulled my truck into his massive, circular brick driveway. My rusted, dented, paint-chipped work vehicle looked like an absolute, offensive eyesore parked right next to his shiny, perfectly polished black luxury sedan. Tristan swung the heavy oak front door open before I even had a chance to knock. He was wearing a dark silk bathrobe, holding a heavy crystal glass filled with expensive, amber scotch and smelling strongly of high-end, musky cologne. He smiled broadly, his perfectly white teeth flashing, and patted my shoulder affectionately with a hand so incredibly soft it felt like it had never lifted anything heavier than a silver golf club. He thanked me profusely for coming out so incredibly late to help a friend in need, leading me confidently through his sprawling marble hallways. The walls were heavily decorated with strange modern art pieces that likely cost more than I made in an entire, back-breaking year. We descended the wide, carpeted stairs into his finished basement, a space which looked exactly like a private, exclusive gentleman's club. There were dark leather couches, a custom-built billiards table, and the massive, silent, problematic wine fridge sitting heavily in the far corner. I did not say much of anything. I just nodded tightly, set my heavy toolbox down on the tile floor with a loud clank, and immediately went to work. Pure muscle memory took over my body. My hands knew exactly how to test the complex compressor unit, how to check the delicate cooling coils, and how to quickly locate the loose, faulty relay switch hidden in the back. It was a remarkably simple, 10-minute fix. But the entire time I was kneeling there on the cold floor, fixing his expensive machine, Tristan stood casually right behind me, swirling the ice in his scotch glass. He started casually asking how Clara was doing, mentioning offhandedly that she seemed a little bit stressed out lately and that I should probably take her on a nice vacation. Every single word that casually fell out of his mouth felt like a heavy physical blow to the back of my head. I gripped my wrench tightly, my knuckles turning completely white, aggressively tightening a heavy brass bolt while using every ounce of willpower I possessed to hold back the overwhelming, violent urge to swing the heavy metal tool backward directly into his smiling teeth. After I violently snapped the back metal panel of the expensive wine fridge back into its proper place, the low, familiar hum of the heavy compressor finally filled the quiet room. The freezing air started flowing into the cabinet almost immediately. Tristan cheered loudly, taking a celebratory sip of his scotch, offering to pour me a heavy drink, and casually asking exactly what he owed me for the emergency late-night service call. I told him it was absolutely nothing, telling him that good friends always help good friends in their time of need. I kept my voice incredibly steady, my facial expression completely blank and pleasant. I asked him if it would be all right if I used his bathroom to quickly wash the dark, sticky grease off my hands before driving back to my house. He waved his hand dismissively, telling me to just run upstairs and use the massive master bathroom, claiming it had the absolute best hot water pressure in the entire house. I slowly walked up his grand, sweeping, dramatically lit staircase. My heavy, steel-toed work boots felt like they weighed 100 pounds each as they sank into the incredibly plush, thick carpet. I stepped through the double doors into the master bathroom. The room was obnoxiously huge, larger than my entire downstairs living room, covered completely in floor-to-ceiling imported white marble. There was a massive, deep-soaking tub in the center and a sprawling vanity counter lined entirely with dozens of expensive, imported bath products, colognes, and thick luxury towels. I turned the heavy gold faucet, watching the steaming hot water run over my hands, watching the dark, dirty grease swirl slowly down the shiny, gold-plated drain. I aggressively splashed the freezing cold water onto my exhausted face, gripping the edges of the marble counter, and looked up at my own reflection in the massive mirror. I looked incredibly old. I looked completely exhausted, broken, and hollow. I reached over blindly to grab a thick, soft white towel resting neatly on a glass shelf right next to the mirror. As I pulled the heavy towel away, my clumsy hand accidentally knocked over a tall, decorative glass jar filled with purple bath salts. It tipped over heavily, rolling across the marble, revealing something that had been tucked very securely behind it. My heart stopped beating completely. The air vanished from the room. It was a small, square, slightly faded piece of glossy photographic paper. An old-school Polaroid photograph. I reached out and picked it up with a violently trembling hand. The remaining air in my lungs instantly turned into solid ice. It was Clara. It was my wife. She was completely naked in the photograph, wearing nothing except for a tiny, intricate piece of black lace lingerie that I had absolutely never seen before in our 15 years of marriage. She was posed provocatively right here, sitting on this exact same white marble vanity where I was currently standing. Her diamond wedding ring, the ring I had spent 6 months saving up for, was clearly visible, glittering on her finger. She was looking directly into the camera lens with an expression of pure, unadulterated, filthy lust. It was a passionate, wild expression she had absolutely not given to me in well over a decade. At the bottom of the white border of the photograph, written clearly in her elegant, perfectly familiar cursive handwriting, were 5 simple, soul-destroying words, "For my real, true man." The scattered, confusing pieces of my life suddenly snapped together so violently it actually made me physically dizzy. The 0% paternity test results. The countless late nights she claimed to be showing expensive houses to demanding clients. The random, incredibly expensive new clothes she always claimed she bought on clearance sales. Tristan's constant, hovering presence in our home. His soft, uncalloused hands. The boys. Oh dear God, the boys. Nolan possessed Tristan's exact, distinct, square jawline. Miles possessed his exact, slightly tilted eye shape. How in the hell had I been so incredibly, blindingly stupid? A lesser, weaker man would have immediately walked downstairs and violently broken Tristan's jaw in 3 places. A lesser man would have grabbed the heavy steel wrench from the basement floor and blindly destroyed every single expensive, fragile thing in sight. But looking down at that filthy photograph, the immediate, blinding grief and the initial shock slowly burned away, leaving behind something entirely new, something terrifying. My blood ran completely cold. My mind suddenly became incredibly clear, perfectly calm, and deeply calculating. If I hit him, if I lose control, I will go to prison, and those 2 monsters will win everything. I carefully, meticulously slid the Polaroid photograph deeply into my front chest pocket, placing it right over my pounding heart. I wiped my face completely dry, made absolutely sure the heavy jar of bath salts was returned exactly to where it had been resting, and walked very slowly down the carpeted stairs. Tristan was waiting by the massive front door, gently swirling his expensive scotch. I looked right at him and smiled. I actually genuinely smiled. I told him to have a wonderful night, firmly shook his soft, treacherous hand, and walked out into the freezing cold night air. The brutal war had just begun. The quiet drive back to my neighborhood felt exactly like floating aimlessly through a suffocating, terrifying nightmare. The familiar streets, the streetlights, everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but the entire world had fundamentally, violently shifted underneath my tires. I parked my heavy truck in my own driveway and simply sat there behind the steering wheel for a very long time, staring blankly at the front door. Clara's luxury car was not parked in the driveway. She was still out, likely wrapping up whatever filthy lies she was currently acting out. I slowly unlocked the heavy wooden front door and stepped quietly into the completely silent, dark house. I did not take off my heavy boots. I walked straight up the carpeted stairs, bypassing the closed door of our master bedroom entirely, and stopped silently at the partially open door of the boys' shared bedroom. I pushed the door open incredibly gently, wincing as the hinges squeaked slightly. The small superhero nightlight plugged into the wall cast a warm, soft yellow glow over the 2 small twin beds. Nolan was sprawled out aggressively on his back, his long arm dangling loosely off the edge of the mattress. Miles was curled tightly into a small ball under his heavy blankets, fiercely holding his worn-out, incredibly ragged stuffed bear. I stood silently in that doorway for at least 20 minutes, just silently watching their chests rise and fall as they breathed. I carefully traced the specific lines of their young faces in the dim, yellow light. Now that I finally knew the horrifying truth, the physical resemblance was absolutely undeniable. They were not mine. They were the biological, living product of the man who had been secretly laughing right in my face for well over a decade. I felt a sudden, massive wave of nausea hit me so incredibly strong that I had to reach out and grip the wooden doorframe tightly just to keep myself from collapsing onto the floor. But right then, Nolan softly muttered something incoherent in his deep sleep and shifted his weight. In that fleeting, quiet moment, he looked exactly like the terrified little boy who had sobbed hysterically in my arms when his very first pet goldfish died. He looked exactly like the incredibly determined boy I had spent 3 exhausting weeks teaching to ride a bright red bicycle without those training wheels, running behind him until my lungs burned. I stood there and intensely thought about the thousands of brown paper school lunches I had carefully packed, the countless imaginary monsters I had bravely chased out from under those exact beds, the dozens of burning, feverish foreheads I had gently kissed in the middle of terrifying nights. Biology is merely a mechanical, scientific accident. DNA is just a complicated, random recipe. Fatherhood, true fatherhood, is a deliberate, conscious choice. Fatherhood is physically showing up every single day when it is incredibly hard, when you are completely exhausted, when you feel like you have absolutely nothing left inside you to give. I was the man who raised them. I was their father. That profound, overwhelming love in my chest was completely real, even if the biological foundation of it was a grotesque lie. I decided right then and there that I would absolutely not let Clara or Tristan take that sacred title away from me. I quietly, carefully pulled their bedroom door closed and walked back downstairs, heading straight through the kitchen and out into my detached garage workshop. I immediately pulled the folded, crumpled DNA test results from the bottom of my toolbox. I flipped the switch on my heavy-duty industrial paper shredder and slowly fed the heavy laboratory papers into the steel teeth, watching the clinical, undeniable proof of my ultimate humiliation get chewed into tiny, completely unreadable white strips. But I absolutely kept the filthy Polaroid photograph. I carefully placed it inside a clear, waterproof plastic protective sleeve and hid it securely behind a false wooden panel located right behind my heavy steel workbench. It was my primary evidence. Clara finally came home at 3 in the morning. I heard the front door click. She slipped quietly into our dark bedroom and slid into the bed like a silent ghost. I laid there completely still, my eyes shut tight, carefully controlling my breathing so she would think I was deeply asleep. She smelled overwhelmingly like expensive floral soap, mixed heavily with Tristan's signature, musky cologne. It made me want to vomit. I did not move a single muscle, perfectly playing the fool, until the morning sun finally came up. Morning arrived with the absolute usual, chaotic rush of family life. We were serving breakfast, frantically packing heavy school backpacks and listening to the boys arguing loudly over what cartoon to watch on the television. Clara rushed frantically around the bright kitchen wearing her incredibly sharp, expensive real estate blazer, looking absolutely perfect and completely put together. She poured a hot cup of coffee, casually handed the ceramic mug to me, and leaned over to kiss my rough cheek. "Have a really great day today, honey," she said, her voice sounding incredibly bright, energetic, and perfectly cheerful. "I love you so much." I looked her right in her bright, lying eyes. "I love you too," I replied automatically, my voice completely steady. It was genuinely terrifying for me to realize just how incredibly easy it was to lie straight to someone's face once you fully realized that the other person had been flawlessly doing it to you for years. After they all finally left the house for work and school, I did not drive to my scheduled repair jobs. I called my clients and canceled every single one of my appointments for the entire day. I desperately needed to build a comprehensive surveillance network. Clara always looked down on me, thinking I was just a dumb, uneducated blue-collar worker who fixed broken air conditioners. She conveniently forgot that modern, high-efficiency heating and cooling systems are actually highly complex, intricate networks of digital sensors, computer mainframes, and advanced programmed logic boards. I knew my way around complicated technology vastly better than she ever would in a million years. I knew Clara's daily and weekly routine perfectly. Every single Thursday night, without fail, she took a very long, incredibly hot bath while drinking a large glass of red wine, loudly claiming it was her necessary spa time to completely decompress from the high stress of selling expensive houses. She always left her personal mobile phone charging quietly on the kitchen island counter for exactly 45 minutes. That specific Thursday evening, as soon as I heard the heavy bathroom door lock click and the loud sound of the hot water running into the tub, I immediately rushed to the kitchen and grabbed her phone. I had specifically purchased a very cheap, untraceable prepaid burner phone using physical cash 2 days prior, along with downloading highly specialized, military-grade cloning software I bought securely off the deep internet. I quickly plugged her expensive phone into my work laptop, then frantically connected the cheap burner phone to the other port. My rough hands were sweating profusely, making the mouse slippery. If she decided to walk out of that bathroom right now, the entire war was over before it even began. I stared intensely at the screen, watching the slow progress bar crawl agonizingly across the monitor. 10%. 30%. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of her terrible pop music playing loudly from the bathroom speaker. 50%. The passing minutes felt like agonizing, incredibly long hours. Finally, the screen flashed green. The data transfer was completely finished. I violently unplugged her device, used my shirt to carefully wipe my oily fingerprints completely off her glass screen, and set it down in the exact same position, at the exact same angle she had left it. But I was not entirely done yet. I quickly grabbed a tiny, physical hardware keystroke logger device I had bought and plugged it deep into the hidden back USB port of her home office desktop computer, hiding it completely behind the metal desk frame where she would never look. I also stealthily installed a hidden, background microphone recording software program that would instantly activate and record audio whenever the laptop was simply powered on. I was rapidly, systematically turning our quiet, peaceful family home into a highly efficient intelligence-gathering facility. Over the course of the next 2 agonizingly long months, I played the difficult role of the tired, oblivious, hard-working husband to absolute perfection. I sat down and ate hot dinner with my fake family every single night. I smiled and asked Clara detailed questions about her busy day showing houses. I sat in the bleachers and loudly cheered at the boys' weekend soccer games. And every single night, long after everyone else in the house was fast asleep, I quietly locked myself deep inside my detached garage workshop, opened my secured laptop, and willingly descended straight into absolute hell. The cloned burner phone updated its data automatically over the wireless network. I sat alone at my heavy metal workbench, entirely surrounded by heavy steel wrenches, scattered copper tubing, and the smell of motor oil, slowly scrolling through literally thousands of saved text messages. The casual, effortless cruelty of their private words was absolutely breathtaking. Clara would frequently text Tristan while she was sitting casually right on the living room couch next to me. She constantly called me a pathetic, boring loser. She complained endlessly to him about the lingering smell of machine oil on my work clothes. Tristan would quickly reply with row of laughing faces, arrogantly telling her not to worry about it, that her dumb, blue-collar ATM machine would just keep happily paying all the expensive bills until they were finally ready to make their move. I sat in the dark and listened to hours upon hours of crystal-clear audio recordings secretly captured from her office laptop. I heard her having explicit, highly intimate phone calls with Tristan while I was literally right outside the window, sweating and mowing the front lawn. I heard them laughing hysterically together about the specific times I had sincerely shaken Tristan's hand and thanked him for being such a wonderfully supportive, good friend to my 2 growing boys. But the absolute worst, most devastating discovery came on a freezing, rainy Tuesday night. I was digging deeply through a hidden, encrypted cloud storage drive that I had finally managed to gain access to by using the hidden keystroke logger to capture her master passwords. There was a specific, locked folder titled, very simply, Exit Strategy. I double-clicked and opened the digital documents one by one. My chest tightened up so incredibly hard I genuinely thought I was having a massive heart attack right there in the garage. This was not just a dirty, secret affair. It was a highly coordinated, hostile, legal takeover of my entire existence. There were dozens of offshore bank statements. Clara and Tristan had secretly set up a dummy corporate entity. For the last 4 long years, Clara had been slowly, methodically transferring thousands of dollars at a time from our joint family savings account and my business accounts directly into that offshore entity, constantly lying to me and claiming they were just bad, unlucky real estate investments that went sour. Then I opened the legal drafts. They already had an aggressive, high-priced divorce lawyer on a hefty retainer. The evil plan was laid out perfectly clearly in a forwarded email chain. Clara was actively planning to file for a brutal divorce right after the New Year holidays. She was preparing to legally claim that I was emotionally unstable, prone to violent outbursts, and verbally aggressive. She had already drafted a nightmare custody agreement that would systematically strip me of my parental rights and give her full, sole, physical, and legal custody of both Nolan and Miles. And the final, most sickening, absolutely evil detail of all, she was going to demand the absolute maximum allowed amount of child support and permanent spousal alimony from me. I just sat there, frozen, staring blankly at the glowing computer screen, my vision completely blurring with a terrifying, quiet rage. They were actively, happily planning to leave me completely bankrupt, living alone in a miserable, tiny apartment, forcing me to pay thousands of hard-earned dollars every single month to legally support Tristan's biological children while the two of them lived happily and luxuriously together in his massive mansion. They truly, deeply thought I was just a stupid, uneducated, dirty mechanic. They honestly thought they could easily steal my money, steal my dignity, and legally steal the 2 innocent boys I had lovingly raised from birth. I slowly, deliberately pushed the laptop screen down until it clicked shut. The overwhelming, crushing sadness I had felt for the past 2 months was entirely gone now. There was absolutely nothing left inside my body but a freezing cold, highly mechanical precision. It was finally time to stop gathering information. It was time to start building a massive, unstoppable machine that would ruthlessly grind their perfect, arrogant, incredibly selfish lives right down into fine dust. If you are enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are watching from. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. It had been exactly 1 month since I found the photograph in the bathroom. 1 full, agonizing month of living completely entirely inside my own head, building my case piece by piece. That particular Saturday, the sun was shining brightly, the weather was unseasonably warm, and Tristan decided to host a massive backyard barbecue for our entire extended friend group. I desperately wanted to stay home, to lock myself in my garage and continue working on my exit strategy, but I knew I had to maintain my perfect cover. I forced myself to put on a clean shirt, strap on a fake, pleasant smile, and drive my family to the slaughterhouse. Tristan's backyard was an absolute masterpiece of expensive landscaping. There was an enormous, sparkling blue swimming pool, an outdoor kitchen wrapped in imported stone, and a massive, professional-grade stainless steel grill where Tristan stood, flipping expensive cuts of meat with a silver spatula. I walked through the wooden side gate holding a cheap 6-pack of domestic beer, feeling like a complete ghost haunting my own life. I watched my 2 boys, Nolan and Miles, immediately drop their bags and run screaming with joy straight toward Tristan. Tristan laughed loudly, dropping his spatula to catch Nolan in midair, spinning him around before playfully throwing him into the deep end of the pool. I stood there by the patio table, gripping a cold bottle of beer so incredibly tight the glass felt like it might shatter in my hand. I was watching the biological father play happily with his biological sons, while the idiot who paid for their braces and their school supplies stood silently in the background. It was a form of psychological torture so profound and deeply agonizing that no physical pain could ever possibly compare. Clara walked out of the house carrying a large bowl of potato salad, wearing a bright summer dress that I had paid for just 3 weeks ago. She walked straight over to the grill and bumped her hip playfully against Tristan's. Our friends were all gathered around the patio, laughing, drinking expensive wine, and completely oblivious to the massive, rotting lie happening right in front of their faces. Then, the moment happened. The moment that permanently cemented my absolute hatred for her. One of Clara's real estate friends, a loud, obnoxious woman holding a massive glass of Chardonnay, pointed at Tristan's massive house and yelled out, asking Clara how she managed to put up with a boring, dirty mechanic for a husband when there were wealthy, handsome men like Tristan walking around in the world. Clara did not miss a single beat. She laughed, tossing her hair back, looking directly at Tristan with a filthy, secret smile. "I would gladly trade my husband for the real father of my 2 boys," she joked loudly, waving her hand dismissively in the air. The entire patio erupted into loud, boisterous laughter. Everyone thought it was just a dark, playful, sarcastic joke. They thought she was just being funny, exaggerating her frustration with my long working hours. But Tristan stopped flipping the burgers. He looked right at Clara, his eyes dark and serious for a fraction of a second, and a slow, incredibly smug smile spread across his face. We all went completely silent for a brief moment as the joke landed. I stood there, 10 feet away, and I laughed along with them. I actually forced myself to chuckle and take a long sip of my beer. I played the role of the oblivious, good-natured, slightly dim-witted husband perfectly. But inside, my heart finally turned completely to stone. There was no more sadness. There was no more grief over my broken marriage. She was openly mocking my absolute devastation right in front of my face. She was parading her betrayal in the bright sunlight. I smiled at my wife, raised my beer bottle in a silent, sarcastic toast, and quietly promised the universe that I would burn her entire world straight to the ground. The very next morning, I took the entire day off from work. I did not go to the supply house, and I did not answer my business phone. Instead, I drove 3 towns over, far away from Clara's real estate territory and Tristan's business connections, and I walked into the incredibly intimidating, sterile glass office of a very specific, highly ruthless family law attorney. I had spent 3 weeks researching him. He was a former corporate litigator who specifically specialized in high-conflict divorces, asset protection, and, most importantly, severe cases of paternity fraud. I sat down in his leather chair, opened my heavy canvas messenger bag, and placed a massive, meticulously organized 3-ring binder directly onto his polished mahogany desk. I did not waste time crying or complaining. I simply laid out the absolute facts. I showed him the shredded, reconstructed DNA tests. I showed him the offshore bank transfers. I showed him the filthy, explicit text messages, and finally, I slid the Polaroid photograph across the desk. The lawyer, a sharp, unsmiling man in his late 50s, flipped through the binder in complete silence for 20 minutes. When he finally looked up at me, there was a glint of genuine, predatory respect in his eyes. He told me that if I had acted on my anger and hit Tristan, I would have lost absolutely everything. But because I had been patient, because I had gathered undeniable, structural proof of a coordinated financial conspiracy to defraud me of my assets while simultaneously committing deliberate paternity fraud, we had a nuclear option. We spent the next 4 hours quietly and systematically securing my fortress. Clara thought she was incredibly smart, but she had never bothered to actually read the complex incorporation documents I had filed when I first started my heating and air conditioning business 15 years ago. Because the initial seed money for the business came entirely from an inheritance from my late grandfather, and because I had filed as a specific type of limited liability corporation long before we were legally married, The core business entity and its commercial assets were entirely insulated from marital property division. My attorney drafted a series of complex, ironclad legal trusts. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly, invisibly moved every single piece of valuable heavy machinery, every single commercial service contract, and every single dollar of operating capital straight into those protected trusts. I systematically emptied our joint savings accounts, legally transferring the exact, specific amounts of money that Clara had stolen and wired to Tristan's offshore account, essentially clawing back my stolen funds before she even realized they were gone. I changed all the direct deposits. I legally froze her out of my financial universe. I was building a massive, invisible brick wall around myself and the boys. I was creating a legal scenario where, when she finally filed her malicious divorce papers, she would suddenly realize she was completely financially naked. She would be standing in front of a furious judge, trying to explain why she had secretly stolen tens of thousands of dollars to fund an affair with a wealthy man, all while actively lying about the biological parentage of 2 children to extract fraudulent child support. The attorney warned me that the legal fallout would be incredibly brutal, public, and utterly devastating for her. I looked him dead in the eyes, shook his hand firmly, and told him that devastation was exactly what I was paying him for. It was a gloomy, overcast Wednesday afternoon, and I was sitting in the driver's seat of my work truck, parked in the empty lot behind a run-down strip mall. I had a massive, greasy double cheeseburger sitting untouched on the dashboard. I was wearing my noise-canceling headphones, staring blindly at the rain hitting the windshield, listening to a live, crystal-clear audio feed streaming directly from the hidden microphone I had planted in Clara's home office. She had claimed she was working from home that day to finalize a massive commercial real estate contract. She was absolutely not working. Through the headphones, I could hear the unmistakable, heavy sound of our expensive memory foam mattress creaking. I could hear their breathing. They were in my house. They were in my bedroom. They were lying in the exact same bed where I slept every single night. The absolute disrespect was so profound it made my hands physically shake on the steering wheel. I forced myself to sit completely still. I forced myself to listen to every single agonizing second, using the searing pain as fuel to harden my resolve. After a few minutes, the rustling stopped, and their voices came through the microphone, clear and relaxed. Tristan sighed loudly, the sound of a man completely at ease in another man's castle. He asked Clara what her exact timeline was for dropping the final bomb on me. He sounded bored, like he was asking about a dinner reservation. Clara let out a short, cruel laugh. She told him the divorce lawyer was entirely ready to file the paperwork the very first week of January. She confidently explained that she wanted to get through the expensive Christmas holidays first, let me buy all the massive, expensive presents for Nolan and Miles, and then serve me with the legal papers while I was at work. Tristan asked her if she was worried that I might fight for custody of the boys. He mentioned that I seemed incredibly attached to them. The response Clara gave him is something that will echo in my brain for the absolute rest of my life. She scoffed loudly, the sound filled with pure, unadulterated contempt. She explicitly stated that I was way too weak and pathetic to put up a real legal fight. She told Tristan that the family courts almost always heavily favor the mother anyway. She proudly declared that they were going to legally bleed me completely dry, take the house, take my retirement fund, and force me to pay the maximum allowable child support for the next 10 years. She finished her thought by laughing and saying that by next Christmas, Nolan and Miles would be calling Tristan their real dad, and I would just be a miserable, forgotten ghost living in a cheap, tiny apartment on the bad side of town. I slowly reached up and pulled the headphones off my ears. I set them down gently on the passenger seat. The heavy rain continued to pound against the glass of the truck. Any tiny, lingering, pathetic microscopic shred of empathy or sadness I still held onto for the woman I had loved for 15 years evaporated entirely in that exact moment. She was not a confused wife making a terrible mistake. She was a deeply malicious, highly calculating predator attempting to systematically consume my entire life. I picked up my phone and sent a short, encrypted text message to my attorney, telling him to finalize all the defensive legal preparations immediately. Then, I put my truck in drive and pulled out into the heavy rain. I was completely done listening. I was entirely done waiting. The intelligence gathering phase of this war was officially over. It was time to start breaking things. Friday night finally arrived. The air was bitterly cold, threatening the first real snow of the season. I parked my dark work truck completely out of sight, 6 blocks away from the massive, sprawling industrial park where Tristan's wholesale distribution warehouse was located. I knew this massive building intimately. For years ago, when Tristan had first purchased the property, I was the absolute idiot who had proudly spent 3 grueling weeks upgrading his massive commercial HVAC and refrigeration systems for free, just to help my supposedly best friend get his new business off the ground. I pulled a black knit beanie low over my forehead, grabbed my heavy canvas tool bag, and walked silently through the freezing shadows. I knew exactly where the blind spots in his cheap security camera system were. I knew exactly which perimeter door had a faulty magnetic lock that I had repeatedly warned him to fix, advice he had arrogantly ignored. I slipped a thin piece of hardened metal into the door frame, popped the latch, and stepped quietly into the cavernous, pitch-black warehouse. The massive space smelled like fresh cardboard and machine oil. Just that morning, Tristan had taken delivery of an absolutely massive, $500,000 shipment of high-end, specialized commercial refrigeration units and fragile digital components. They were stacked 30 feet high on the steel racks, representing his entire operating budget for the next 2 financial quarters. I did not bring gasoline. I did not bring explosives. I am an HVAC mechanic. I used the tools of my specific trade. I walked silently to the massive, centralized cooling plant located at the rear of the building. Using a specialized torque wrench, I very carefully, precisely loosened the heavy brass pressure release valves on 4 of the massive primary coolant tanks containing highly concentrated industrial ammonia. I did not break them. I simply backed the threads off just enough to create a microscopic, undetectable slow leak. The highly corrosive, incredibly toxic ammonia gas would hiss out silently over the entire weekend. Because it was heavier than air, it would slowly pool on the floor, creeping upward, silently eating away at the sensitive copper wiring, melting the fragile digital logic boards, and completely destroying the internal components of every single expensive machine sitting in that warehouse. Next, I walked quietly up the metal stairs to Tristan's glass-enclosed main office. His main server rack was sitting right there in the corner, blinking with green lights. I pulled a small, black USB drive from my pocket. It contained a devastating, highly aggressive piece of custom ransomware I had purchased on the dark web. I plugged it directly into his primary server. I watched the malicious code execute, silently locking down every single invoice, every single client contact, and every single financial record he possessed, encrypting them behind an unbreakable digital wall. But I was not quite finished. Before the encryption fully locked the system, I executed a secondary script. It automatically gathered the specific, hidden files I had found on Clara's computer, the files proving Tristan's offshore tax evasion and corporate money laundering scheme, and blasted them directly to the anonymous whistleblower email address at the Internal Revenue Service, along with an automated tip to the State Insurance Fraud Division. I pulled the USB drive out, wiped down the server rack, and walked calmly back out into the freezing night air. By the time the sun came up on Monday morning, this entire building would be a condemned, toxic wasteland, and his digital life would be completely erased. I walked the 6 blocks back to my truck, feeling an incredibly deep, profound sense of peace settling over my soul. The first massive domino fell bright and early on Monday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table, calmly drinking a cup of black coffee, watching Clara frantically scramble around looking for her car keys. My mobile phone suddenly rang, loudly shattering the morning peace. The caller ID flashed Tristan's name. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, cleared my throat to sound entirely normal, and answered the phone. "Victor, thank God," Tristan shouted into the receiver. His voice was completely frantic, high-pitched, and entirely stripped of its usual arrogant confidence. "Listen to me, I need you to get down to the warehouse right now. Something is incredibly wrong. The entire building smells like bleach and death, the hazmat alarms are screaming, and my computers are completely locked out. I think there was a massive chemical leak." I furrowed my brow, putting on my absolute best performance of a concerned, slightly confused friend. "A chemical leak? Tristan, that sounds incredibly dangerous. You absolutely cannot go inside that building without breathing apparatus. You need to call the fire department immediately." "I cannot call the fire department," Tristan screamed back, pure panic vibrating through the phone speaker. "If the city inspectors see this, they will condemn the entire building. I have a $500,000 shipment sitting in there that has to go out to clients tomorrow morning. Just get down here and cap the leak, please. I will pay you whatever you want." I let out a long, heavy, exaggerated sigh. "Tristan, buddy, I am so sorry. You know I only work on standard commercial freon systems. Industrial ammonia spills are a federal environmental issue. That is completely beyond my skill level. If you breathe that stuff in, it will melt your lungs. You have to call the authorities right now." I hung up the phone before he could scream again. I gently set my phone down on the table and smiled at my coffee mug. By noon, the local news channels were actively flying helicopters over his warehouse. The health department had completely condemned the building, the EPA was fining him by the hour, and his massive inventory was totally destroyed by the corrosive gas. To make matters infinitely worse, because he was locked out of his encrypted servers, he could not process a single refund or contact his furious clients. The second massive domino fell on Tuesday afternoon. Clara had a highly publicized, incredibly important real estate tour scheduled. She was driving for extremely wealthy investors around the county in her leased luxury BMW sport utility vehicle. Months ago, I had custom installed a small, high-end refrigeration unit into the trunk of her vehicle so she could keep expensive bottles of champagne perfectly chilled for her clients. Before I left for work on Tuesday morning, I spent exactly 3 minutes in the garage with her car. I completely bypassed the thermal regulator on the trunk cooler and deliberately crossed the compressor wires. Right in the middle of her massive presentation, while parked in front of a $3 million property, the overworked compressor finally catastrophically failed. It did not catch fire, but it violently exploded, blowing the heavy trunk lid completely open and violently spraying freezing, pressurized coolant, shattered glass, and sticky, ruined champagne all over the driveway and the expensive suits of her wealthy investors. The resulting absolute chaos completely destroyed her presentation, deeply humiliated her in front of the most important clients of her career, and triggered an immediate, highly suspicious investigation by her auto insurance company. I sat in my garage that evening, cleaning my heavy wrenches, watching the local evening news broadcast about the mysterious chemical spill at Tristan's warehouse. Every single wrench, every single gauge, every single component in my toolbox had successfully become a devastating weapon in my silent war. Thursday evening brought a highly unexpected knock at my front door. I opened it to find Hazel, Clara's younger sister, standing on my porch. She was clutching a thick manila envelope against her chest, and she looked incredibly uncomfortable, yet slightly arrogant. Hazel had always looked down on me, constantly agreeing with Clara that I lacked ambition. "We need to talk right now," Hazel demanded, aggressively pushing past me into the living room without an invitation. She threw the heavy envelope violently onto the coffee table. "Clara asked me to legally deliver these to you. They're official divorce papers. She took the boys and she is staying at a luxury hotel downtown until you pack your garbage and move out of this house." I looked down at the envelope, then looked calmly back up at Hazel. "Just like that?" I asked quietly. "Let us just be completely honest here, Victor," Hazel said, crossing her arms tightly. "This marriage has been dead for years. Clara deserves to be truly happy with a man who can actually provide for her. The boys deserve real stability and a father who is actually around, not crawling around in dirty basements all day. Just sign the papers, walk away quietly, and let her have full custody." Be an adult about this." I did not yell. I did not get angry. I simply turned around, walked over to my locked filing cabinet, and pulled out the massive, heavy binder my attorney and I had prepared. I walked back and dropped it heavily onto the coffee table right next to her divorce papers. The loud thud made her jump. "Before I sign a single page of her demands," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "I strongly suggest you sit down and look at exactly what kind of monster your sister truly is." Hazel rolled her eyes dramatically, but she opened the binder. I watched the arrogant color drain completely out of her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She saw the offshore bank transfers. She read the horrifying, cruel text messages. She stared in absolute, silent horror at the filthy Polaroid photograph of her sister posing in Tristan's bathroom. I calmly pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play on the audio recording of Clara and Tristan lying in my bed, laughing about bleeding me dry and erasing my existence from the boys' lives. Clara's cruel, mocking voice echoed loudly through the quiet living room. Hazel began to physically shake. She dropped the heavy binder, the glossy photographs and financial records scattering across the floor like shrapnel from a devastating explosion. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I had absolutely no idea. She told me you were abusive. She told me you were stealing her money." I stood over her. "Now you know the absolute truth," I said coldly. "Go tell your sister that I am not moving out, I am not signing anything, and I am calling a meeting." On Saturday afternoon, I sent 2 separate text messages from my untraceable burner phone. To Tristan, I wrote, "Emergency meeting regarding the insurance fraud investigation. Meet me at the abandoned ice factory on Industrial Road. Come alone or you go to prison." To Clara, I wrote, "Tristan is panicking and planning to confess everything to the police to save himself. Get to the old ice factory immediately." I drove to the massive, decaying brick building on the edge of town. I had worked there right after high school. It was a cavernous, empty echo chamber of concrete and steel. I spent 3 hours setting up my stage. I rigged a massive, high-definition digital projector to the ceiling, pointing it at a huge white concrete wall. I connected massive industrial speakers. Then, I parked my truck around the back, walked inside, locked the heavy steel doors, and waited in the pitch-black shadows. Tristan arrived first, his luxury sedan crunching loudly on the broken glass in the parking lot. 5 minutes later, Clara's rented economy car pulled in. I watched them meet at the heavy side door, immediately arguing, completely confused as to why the other was there. They pushed through the unlocked door, stepping hesitantly into the dark, echoing cavern of the main factory floor. "Hello?" Tristan called out, his voice shaking slightly. "Is anyone here?" I flipped the heavy industrial breaker switch on the wall. Massive overhead halogen lights slammed on, blinding them instantly. I stepped slowly out of the shadows, wearing my heavy work boots and a clean, dark jacket. I held a massive, heavy steel pipe wrench casually in my right hand. "Victor?" Clara gasped, taking a sudden step backward, her eyes starting nervously toward the locked exit. "What is this? What are you doing here?" "I am just fixing a massive, catastrophic system failure," I said calmly, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. I hit the button on my remote control. The digital projector roared to life. A massive, 20-foot-high image of the filthy Polaroid photograph blasted onto the wall behind them. Clara screamed, covering her face. The image switched rapidly. It showed the 0% DNA test results. It showed the offshore bank account transfers. It showed the text messages of Tristan calling me a pathetic ATM machine. The massive speakers blasted the audio recording of them in my bed, laughing about stealing my children. Tristan's face turned completely purple with absolute rage. He realized his entire life, his reputation, and his freedom were completely destroyed. "You son of a bitch!" he screamed, completely losing his mind. He lunged forward, swinging his soft, manicured fist violently at my head. But Tristan had spent his entire life typing on keyboards and holding wine glasses. I had spent 15 years wrestling heavy steel compressors and hauling cast iron pipes. The The physical fight lasted exactly 4 seconds. I easily ducked under his clumsy, slow punch. I brought the heavy steel handle of the wrench up hard, driving it directly into his ribcage. He collapsed instantly to the concrete floor, violently gasping for air, clutching his shattered ribs, whimpering like a beaten dog. Clara fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically, begging me to stop, begging me to think about our family, claiming she still loved me. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. "We do not have a family, Clara," I said quietly. "And the absolute best part is, I am not the only one who knows it." I pointed the wrench up toward a small, glowing red light mounted on a steel beam above us. I had set up a high-definition wireless camera. I casually informed them that this entire confrontation, the projected evidence, the audio, and Tristan crying on the floor, had been broadcasting live for the last 15 minutes to a private social media group. A group that specifically contained every single one of Clara's real estate brokers, Tristan's wealthy investors, and our entire extended family. I turned around, unlocked the heavy steel door, and walked out into the cold sunlight, leaving them entirely alone in the dark with the shattered, ruined remains of their pathetic lives. 6 months later, the dust had permanently settled. Clara was officially facing federal wire fraud charges for the stolen money. Because of the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of her malicious intent and the blatant paternity fraud, a judge completely stripped her of all custody rights, granting me full, permanent legal guardianship of the boys. Tristan's insurance claim was flatly denied due to his server being wiped, leading to immediate bankruptcy. The IRS seized his mansion to pay for his massive tax evasion. He was currently living in a weekly motel, awaiting criminal trial. It was a warm spring evening. I was sitting comfortably in the wooden bleachers at the local baseball field. Nolan stepped up to the plate, swung the bat hard, and hit a massive double into left field. I stood up and cheered at the top of my lungs. He looked over at me, his face glowing with absolute pride, and pointed at me, mouthing the word Dad. I looked past the chain-link fence and saw Clara standing entirely alone in the parking lot. She looked incredibly old, completely haggard, and utterly destroyed. She was staring at us with hollow, desperate eyes. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just turned my back to her, focused on my boy, and smiled. Am I wrong for unleashing complete financial, social, and legal destruction upon them, or did they get exactly what they deserved for trying to steal the only thing that mattered to me, my sons? Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button for more daily stories. And let me know in the comments what you would have done in my shoes.